Hello and welcome to the Game Theory Podcast. I'm your host, Sam Vicini. We are presented by The Athletic and CLNS Media. Today on the show, we're going to have a two-part podcast. First, we're going to discuss some NBA news and notes with good friend of the program, Jared Weiss, from over at CelticsBlog, CLNS Media, everywhere, really, that has to do with Boston Celtics content. Jared does a great job covering it. Second part of the show is going to be with Reags from over at Barstool, talking about the Taurean Thompson transfer, talking about the Mitchell Robinson situation. A lot going on in college basketball, so I wanted to kind of get to that news as well. Jared, how is it going, man? It's good to get on the phone with you. I think that you are, this is your first time on the podcast, which is a little bit surprising.
I don't know how it took this long. I'm somewhat offended, but I'm still happy to be here.
You should be. I'm so sorry. You know, I feel terrible. I've liked your work for a while, and, you know, we finally got to hang out a little bit more in Vegas this summer. And, yeah, it's crazy that you have not been on the podcast until now. I'm
just honored to talk to the only man in July in Vegas wearing a sweater.
Yeah.
I still don't comprehend.
See, here's my thing. I wear long sleeves everywhere. Like, I don't care if it's 99, like 105 degree heat in Las Vegas.
Or 120 degree heat.
Yeah. Or if it's like, you know, 40 degrees here in Los Angeles whenever it gets cold occasionally. Like, I'm going to wear long sleeves because I just like having long sleeves like over my arms, I guess. Like, I just like the feeling of the comfort level of it, I guess.
See, I assumed it was you don't want to get arrested for taking everybody to the gun show, and, you know, open carry laws are very restrictive in Vegas, obviously.
This is clearly what is happening here. All fucking 5'9" of me, you know, worried about that. Let's talk a little bit about the team that you cover, the Boston Celtics, because while Mike Pina and I discussed the Kyrie Irving, Isaiah Thomas trade in detail just an hour after it happened, there have been some complications, I would think it is fair to say. So what is happening right now as we record this at 6:15 Eastern time on Monday is that Isaiah Thomas has taken his physical for the Cleveland Cavaliers. And nobody's coming out and saying that he has failed the physical. I think that the language here has been actually really, really important. But there are some concerns, and according to Adrian Wojnarowski of ESPN, it is a sensitive issue right now. And it all has to do with Isaiah Thomas's hip, which he hurt in the playoff series against Cleveland, or at least exacerbated in the playoff series against Cleveland. What are your thoughts on this whole thing, Jared? Because it seems like the Cavaliers are trying to, extract more value from the Cleveland Cavaliers now, or from the Boston Celtics, I'm sorry. And this whole thing has become a mess. So where do you stand on all of this?
Well, I would say it's miraculous that the doctors are probably not going to be able to finalize their assessment of the physical until the Cavaliers aren't getting their phone calls answered anymore from Danny Ainge. So that the terminology surrounding that is going to be is definitely very interesting. That they're definitely not saying he's failed the physical because they want to be able to move forward with this trade.
Yep.
The idea that the Celtics hadn't provided sufficient medical information for them to get a clear picture of what they were dealing with, I think is a misnomer. I think it's been, from everything I've seen out there, I think the only time it's been brought up has been mostly speculative, but it keeps popping up in my Twitter feed, so I'm trying to bat it down as much as I can. And I know that Chris Mannix reported that the Celtics are very confident that they portrayed the injury accurately, which is interesting because the injury's portrayal towards the media, which obviously they're not going to be super transparent with the media because, why would you? But it hasn't been a completely linear progression over the course of the summer from the various check-ins we've had from Danny Ainge or Brad Stevens. There has been a little bit of a zigzag from moving ahead to still needs to see doctors and we got to be cautiously optimistic. And it's never been like a completely linear, straightforward recovery. It took them, I think, 2 months of letting the hip heal before doctors actually ruled out surgery. And the reasons why surgery was ruled out are going to continue to remain unclear for a long time. There's a lot of ways you could speculate as to why he's not doing it. Maybe he don't want to have surgery before his right before his contract year and miss half, if not most of his contract year. I mean, there's a lot of motivations behind not doing that. But also, Isaiah's smart enough to know he doesn't want to tank his entire career just to try. He could always have a bounce back year after signing a 1-year contract or whatever he wanted to do. I mean, there's plenty of options there, but Cleveland's clearly playing a leverage game here. It's a dangerous game because if they are not making the claim that they were misled or were not clear as to his injury, then they're basically copping to not negotiating and executing the trade in good faith, which I'm sure the league would find to be a pretty significant circumvention to fair trading, because they make this trade with the Celtics where the Celtics have completely incinerated the bridge between them and Isaiah and Jay Crowder. So now the Celtics can't go back on that trade unless it's an extreme situation where like Cleveland's demanding one of their star young players, because the Celtics can't really reintegrate Thomas and Crowder into their locker room anymore. I mean, they completely burned that bridge. So the Celtics maybe could give in to giving one of their lesser value first round picks. I think they'll try to push for a second round pick or just maybe nothing at all. But I just don't see any way that Cleveland's going to be able to squeeze out something like Jason Tatum or Jaylen Brown, which I don't know who leaked that. I can't even remember who was the first person to report that.
I think that Woj said it on ESPN. Okay. And said that Cleveland is going to ask about it. He didn't say that it was actually a possibility. He said that Cleveland was going to ask about integrating one of those two into the trade, which is fine. Whatever.
And if I run into Rihanna, I'm going to ask her on a date. But if I'm not an all-star, I'm not getting it. It's the same thing.
Sure, that's actually a really apt comparison of this thing. And what I will say about acting in good faith versus bad faith, and I think this actually has a lot to do with where my thoughts are on this. So, one of the biggest gray areas in the NBA as a whole and in the collective bargaining agreement is the difference in medicals from team to team, right? Mm-hmm. The doctors team to team have a lot of different leeway in terms of what they think a significant issue is versus what they think a significant issue is not. You see this all the time, for instance, with draft prospects, right? Some teams red flag guys, some teams yellow flag guys. The same player could be red flagged by 6 teams because of injury, could be yellow flagged by 10 teams, and could be green flagged by 14 teams. You know what I mean? It's just very dependent on the doctor and on what the team's policy is on injury in general. And with Isaiah Thomas, it seems like what's happening here is that there's some concern over the short-term value of Isaiah Thomas, given that he's on a 1-year contract. Is he going to be able to suit up immediately for the Cleveland Cavaliers, given this hip injury, given they only have him for 82 more games plus the playoffs under contract? And I think it's a fair stance for them to take. I think it's a fair stance for them to want to get their team doctors looking at this contract or looking at this asset that they've just acquired. I don't really have a problem with them trying to, potentially void this deal based on the fact that, they thought that Isaiah Thomas was in worse shape than what Boston thinks Isaiah Thomas is. I don't really think there's any sort of good faith or bad faith happening here in terms of the injury. Where I start to get problematic on this is that just look at this trade and what it was. So for Kyrie Irving alone, the Boston Celtics gave up a second-team All-NBA player who was injured in Isaiah Thomas. They gave up one of the most valuable contracts, role players in the league in Jay Crowder, who's on 3 years, $22 million, which is an incredibly valuable deal. They give up Ante Zizic, who they have player control under for potentially 7 to 9 more years, who has, statistically been incredible in Europe. I think they've been extremely pleased with his development. He is a genuine asset for the Cleveland Cavaliers. And then on top of that, they get the best asset in the deal as well in this Brooklyn 2018 pick that's unprotected. So for me, the value of Isaiah Thomas being injured and being sent via injury, the value of that has already been baked into this trade, in my opinion. So where I stand on this whole thing is, if the Cavaliers want to void this trade based on the fact that they thought that Isaiah Thomas was worse injured than what they anticipated, I think that's totally fine, and I think that's fair. Where I struggle with it is they're trying to now, hold up Boston for more value when it seems to me the value was already baked into the deal based on Isaiah Thomas's asset value being reduced within the whole trade itself, because it's very clear to me that, Cleveland or Boston baked in that asset value within this deal. So I'm okay with a voided trade if I'm Cleveland. I'm not really okay with them trying to leverage more out of a trade that was already leveraged, I guess, is my take. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, you're preaching to the choir, and just to kind of expound on a few of the points there, just working backwards, you're absolutely right. I think it would be in poor faith for them to try to squeeze some sort of other major asset, to try to basically to say to Ainge, listen, this is the Thomas short-term injury concern is more significant than we understood it to be. Can you please give us another first-round pick or something like that to compensate for the fact that we're not going to have him healthy for a while, and we're assuming more risk than we expected when we acquired him? That would be somewhat fair. To say you need to give us Jason Tatum or Jaylen Brown or even Terry Rozier, who I've been seeing tossed around as like a throw-in because there's injury depth concerns. It's like Rozier's a valued prospect for the Celtics. He's not a toss-in player. Abdel Nader is a better example of like a toss-in player who's a solid prospect but doesn't project to be more than like a decent rotation player. So I think adding a little icing on the cake to make up for more risk than they presumed to be taking on, that seems to be reasonable in negotiating in good faith. Trying to completely flip this trade on the head because you really wanted Jason Tatum all along, I think it's an almost obtuse negotiation in bad faith.
Yeah, so, and if I'm Boston in that scenario, I'm just calling their bluff, because I don't think, and I don't know this for a fact, but I don't think they have a better offer on the table than this. It would be really hard for me to believe that Cleveland has a better offer on the table than this, even including Isaiah Thomas's injury. Because for me, Isaiah Thomas is probably the third most valuable piece in this trade. I think that Jay Crowder with 3 years left is probably a little bit more valuable on that contract at $7 million per year than Isaiah Thomas is with 1 year left on his deal. I think obviously that Brooklyn pick is very clearly the most valuable asset that Cleveland is getting back. For me, Isaiah's health, yeah, they want to compete this year, but it's just not the most important thing value-wise to me. And maybe you can say that I'm overrating youth talent, but when you look at what Cleveland has going forward here, they don't have all of their draft picks left. If LeBron was to leave, and I think that if you speak with people around the NBA, that a lot of people would say that they think he is, but those are people that aren't necessarily in the know. Only LeBron James in his camp can tell you what LeBron is going to do, and they certainly keep things so close to the vest that it's really difficult to say right now. If LeBron was to leave and you have this Brooklyn pick, it makes it a lot easier to go out and rebuild on the fly next summer, because you can have your 2018 pick, you can have your 2019 pick, and you can get rolling here. You can get this thing going pretty quickly, I think. So I'm just not generally a fan of the way that this negotiation has gone down. And I'm generally kind of at a loss for, what Cleveland is doing here beyond just trying to get something extra small out of Boston. I'm surprised that, we're sitting here talking about this on Monday at now 6:30 Eastern time. I'm surprised that this has gone on over the weekend.
I'm just surprised we're talking about anything like this at the end of August, which is supposed to be the biggest dead period of the NBA. I mean, we are blessed with a full year of NBA this year, which is great. And there is the threshold for where I wouldn't want to do this trade from Cleveland's perspective, as far as Thomas is being injured, is he would have to be out for the year. He would have to need surgery now and then miss the entire year for me to not want to do this trade. Because, for one, if you think that Thomas is going to regain health, they're not going to get another player nearly as good as Isaiah Thomas for several years now. I mean, he's he's an elite scorer where if assuming he makes it back to even 80% health this year, he's still going to be an elite scorer, an all-star caliber player. So it's like there's no he would have to not be able to play period for Cleveland for them to not want to do this trade, because Cleveland's not going to have trouble getting a top 4 seed in the Eastern Conference or even a top 2 seed in the Eastern Conference if Thomas is out for a lot of the year. Like, they're still going to be one of the best teams in the conference without Thomas, and they're clearly 1 or 2 with Thomas on board. But that, the net pick is just, I think there's becoming some revisionist history now, or even revisionist forethought, with especially in Boston, where people are now pretending like the Nets pick isn't a great pick. Obviously, after the trades that the Nets made throughout July, they have gotten better, and they're probably going to be significantly better than last year. But for them to make something like a 15-win jump and not be like a top 6 pick or top 8 pick or so is pretty unlikely.
I talked about that with Mike Pina, and Mike even is on the side of the Nets maybe not being worse than we think they are, or maybe being better than we think they are. I'm not there. And I'm someone who is pretty high on D'Angelo Russell. I think, again, this season, he's going to average something close to 20 points and 7 assists a game. We'll see on efficiency. But then you look at the rest of their team, their third best player is either DeMarre Carroll, who really struggled to get on the floor the last 2 years for Toronto in the playoffs, and Tim Mozgov, who is Tim Mozgov. I don't know that I really need to say a whole lot else. And
you made your point very clearly there. I would say Rondé Hollis-Jefferson's probably the third best, though.
Maybe, but he's a total 0 offensively right now.
Exactly. The point being,
you take Karis LeVert making a jump, but we're betting on so many variables here that it's crazy to me that this is even a conversation. They would have to. I think 32, 33 wins is possible, but I think it's at the far right end of their win distribution curve. I don't think it's impossible, but I think that the far more likely area is probably 25, 26 wins.
I completely concur, and therefore we're making the point that that's looking at a top 8 pick or
player this offseason.
Yeah. We can go down a rabbit hole of whether they're actually better with D'Angelo Russell than Brook Lopez. Whatever. If Jeremy Lin gets hurt again, it doesn't really matter. So, no matter how much they've reinforced. Point being, this is probably going to be a top 8 pick, maybe even a top 5 pick.
I would say top 5. In my opinion, it's going to be a top 5 pick.
Okay, and then, I think there's at least 5 elite prospects at the top of this draft, and it could all go number 1. You know these guys better than I do, and I'm sure you agree that there's at least that, if not more. Depending, I haven't watched enough Roger Williams to know how I feel about him yet. But
Robert Williams at Texas A&M.
Yeah, sorry, but point being, this. When I first saw the offer, and I asked Danny Ainge in the conference call afterwards, which, by the way, clearly the Celtics did not think this was going to happen, because they had a conference call right after the trade happened, so they did not see this coming, and I think that's why they're pretty pissed off, is because they think this is a little ridiculous, because there isn't any reason for Cleveland to be backtracking on the trade. But point being, I asked them, why did you include the pick? How much has the value of the pick changed? What led to you guys being willing to get rid of it? And he kind of answered the question as if I asked a different question about why don't you care about the pick anymore, which is not what I asked. But the point being, he said, including in this answer and a few other ways, that pick was something that they valued really greatly. So it's clear that they still looked at the pick as a top 5 pick. And then when he said that he's not sure exactly when Thomas is going to be ready and that his injury factored in some, I think that those answers make a clear connection that this Nets pick is significantly valued by both sides, and it is to offset the risk that is assumed with Thomas, and that this, whatever is going on right now, is not throwing some sort of new variable into the value balance of this trade. So I think you have it 100% correct. And it's a little confusing why Cleveland thinks they can convince Boston into thinking that there's some sort of new variable in the equation, when it seems pretty clear from the outset that not only did they get the Brooklyn pick, but they also got one of the best prospects that the Celtics have. I mean, it wasn't like they took the vet min guy or something like that, or Nate, or one of their lesser draft picks. They got a guy that the Celtics were projecting to be maybe their starting center by next year.
Yeah, like I would imagine Ante Zizic like legitimately helps Cleveland this year. Like I think he is in a scheme defensively, surrounded by LeBron James, surrounded by Jay Crowder, maybe even surrounded by Tristan Thompson, even though I imagine they won't play together all that often. You can see a scenario where he's insulated enough in terms of his pick and roll movement to where he'll be fine defensively, because I think that a lot of people got really down on him via his summer league performance. Guys like him are not really, made to play well at summer league. He's a guy that needs a lot of structure, I think, defensively, just because you need to be able to kind of insulate the way that he moves laterally. And I think Cleveland, they were really bad defensively last year, but you play him in, potential second units that include, maybe one of Jay Crowder or LeBron James, and Iman Shumpert if Shumpert sticks around, and a couple of other athletic guys. I think you're probably going to be more okay than what people are anticipating, at least from him.
Yeah, and if for some reason you're more interested, if you're listening to this and you're more interested in learning about Ante Zizic right now than any of these other variables, at Vegas I did this piece on some of his defensive technique stuff that he's working on, and talked to Walter McCarty, who was the summer league coach for the Celtics then. So that'll give more insight into some of the issues he has to deal with. I won't dive into it right now, but if his job is just the plant and the pivot, he's going to be effective immediately.
Oh yeah,
he's good at that already.
Awesome screen setter, awesome at rolling to the basket, knows exactly how to time his rolls. Really, really potentially effective vertical floor spacer as a screen and roll center. Kind of a, Marcin Gortat is an effective offensive player despite not being able to stretch the floor really at all. Similar kind of effect there, in my opinion, as what Ante Zizic can have due to his ability to set screens and roll to the basket.
Yeah, I was hoping to just spend most of my season watching an actually effective low post player for a change, as it's been years since Boston has had that. But oh well, I guess they'll have to just continue to rely on Marcus Smart being their best defender in the pivot.
Jared, do you have anything else you want to talk about with this trade before we move on?
Yeah, actually, quickly going back to the thing you're talking about as far as the way that physicals are inconsistent throughout the league. I thought that was a really interesting topic. Not to dive too far, but I think that it's something that has to be the way it is, because teams need to be able to maintain their own definition, because they're the ones assuming the risk, and they need to basically evaluate it based on their own risk threshold. And I think it would be a dangerous precedent for the league to have some sort of, I guess, mandated risk tolerance threshold for injury. So I actually am in favor of the way that it currently is structured, even though it obviously can have a lot of poor consequences, like, for instance, a player getting burned by his former team and then all of a sudden potentially having to go back to his former team. So, yeah,
the way it's written in the CBA is absolutely the way that Jared put it. It's essentially that the assignee team of each player in these trades essentially gets to make the call on their health. And I agree with Jared. I think it should be that way, but it does create a pretty wide gray area that is often not in this collective bargaining agreement, which is just a really interesting facet, I think, of this entire deal.
Agreed. Sorry, I don't have a follow-up there.
Yeah, no, you're totally good. Jared, let's pay some bills here. I am excited. It is getting to the point where it is football season. We have college football this weekend. Ohio State plays on Thursday. I will not be entirely sober when that happens. I am pumped for that to get going. But with football season comes fantasy football, and that means FanDuel is back. Fantasy football for everyday fans. There are new contests starting every week. No busted seasons. Something for everyone here. Lots of contests to choose from. Starting at just $1, going all the way up. I'm sure you can play $1,000 contests if you want. You pick the contest. Choose your team. Watch your score in real time. Jared, do you play on FanDuel? Do you play fantasy football like this as a daily fantasy user?
So you know what? I am a one-team keeper league kind of guy, but I'm dueling this year. I'm FanDueling this year because I've resisted for too long and it's too much fun, especially with football. It's so easy because it requires such a little time investment. But you know, the feedback that I get from basketball fans is that playing daily fantasy for basketball gets you so much more involved with the league and allows you to keep up on everything that's going on and see who are the guys performing well. So I'm going to start playing more just because it'll help me keep up on the rest of the league, because I spend so much of my time focused on one team. It's hard to keep up. So there's a lot of value if you're just a fan that wants to know what's going on. There's a lot of value in playing there.
Yeah, no, I agree 100%. And it's actually kind of how I stay in tune with what's happening in the NFL. I'm not the biggest NFL fan. I don't think that, my listeners are too surprised by hearing that. I watch a lot more college football, and I used to just, go to the bar on Saturday afternoon and, start playing, FanDuel and start playing college football stuff on these daily fantasy sites. And it was just fun. And, as a gambling man myself, I really, really enjoy doing it. Over 2.5 million players have won a cash prize playing fantasy sports on FanDuel. Sign up today. Go to FanDuel.com. Click the Join Now button and use my code GameTheory, GameTheory. Try FanDuel for free with no deposit required. Visit FanDuel.com to claim your free contest and play for a share of $10,000. Just sign up using promo code GameTheory. That's FanDuel.com. Promo code GameTheory, GameTheory. Void where prohibited. Jared, let's talk about this Nerlens Noel situation, because I just find it very weird. So Nerlens Noel, I got a lot of questions on why he wasn't included on the top 25 players under 23 or 23 and under list that I just did last week. And one of the big reasons that he was not included in that was because I kind of thought this was a possibility, that Nerlens Noel would decide to take this qualifying offer from the Mavericks and become essentially a one-year asset. And the way that we broke down those top 25 players, we broke them down as asset values. And I don't think there's really any 23 and under player in the NBA, barring maybe the guys in the top 5, that for a one-year value, you can really make the case for to be on that list. And Nerlens Noel does end up taking this 1 year, $4.1 million contract where he'll now be an unrestricted free agent next summer. And that sets up a really interesting circumstance for the Mavericks, because they trade this, fake first-round pick that Philadelphia 76ers fans love to talk about, as well as a real first-round pick, in my opinion, Justin Anderson, to acquire Noel, and now they're only going to get him for a year and a half before he hits unrestricted free agency. What are your thoughts on the way this whole thing went down? And, before we get into the whole did he or didn't he turn down a $70 million offer, what are your thoughts on Nerlens Noel's game and how this affects the Mavericks now?
Okay, so first off on his game, I agree he's not in the top 25 players under 25. Is that the actual rubric?
23, but sure, whatever.
Okay, thank you. I remember looking at your list and thinking it looks just about right. But he, for one, he shouldn't be on that list because he hasn't been healthy enough in his career, not only to have enough track record, but he hasn't been healthy enough to actually develop enough to get to where he should be. He has underachieved thus far in every stage of his career. I'm not going to put that all on him, but he's been dealing with knee injuries since back when he was in high school. Yep. I was very excited about him coming out of high school. He was a local kid, so I hadn't had a chance to see him play, but a chance to see the hype that built up around him. So I've always been fascinated by his game, and he fits the prototype of the modern center that every team seems to want. It's a perfect complement for what Dallas wants, and he just hasn't shown me any sort of comfort zone outside of 8 feet and are consistently enough to make me think that he's going to turn into a max player next year. And the bet that he's made this offseason, assuming that he turned down a 4-year, $70 million offer, which now even his agent at the time, Happy Walters, has said publicly, and both of us seem to agree that we have absolutely no idea who to believe at this point, because there's so much conflicting information out there. I'm going to operate off the assumption that it's true, because I don't think an agent would publicly state a contract that was turned down and lie about it, because that would just damage their reputation so significantly. But so, operating under the assumption that's true, he essentially needs to get a 4-year deal worth probably at least $23 million a year, which would be an extra $5.5 million over what he turned down. And looking at next year, the only teams that could have the cap space to sign him and it would actually be interested in signing him are Chicago and Atlanta, if I think Dedmon and Muscala would both have to turn down their options for next year, which I probably don't expect to happen, but who knows what will happen this year. But point being, he might not have really any market next year, and I would certainly rather sign with Dallas than with Chicago at this point. So Dallas might be the only really viable option for his career next year. And unless he has a really incredible season, he isn't going to have really a different market for next year. So this seems to be just a very poorly calculated decision on his part. And he's gone through 3 agents in the last year. He was with Andy Miller and fired him just before Christmas. Signed on with Happy Walters, then fired Happy Walters after it certainly appeared, assuming that this is 100% true, and this is kind of stuff that I had heard, was that it seemed like he turned down that 4-year $70 million offer against the advisement of Happy Walters. I'm not 100% clear if that's true, and I'm not reporting that, but that is something that I've heard at a certain point, and this situation has become more murky over time, so I don't know how true that is, but it certainly seems like it's been his angle that he wants to get close to max dollars now, and he feels he deserves that. And based on his career track record so far, he hasn't done anything to remotely deserve that. Frankly, I think the deal that he got offered was already more than he has already probably achieved at this point, and was very much betting on the expectation he'll be healthy and continue to ascend in a team that I think will be built very well to take advantage of his skill set, assuming Dennis Smith stays healthy. I mean, they should be a pretty exciting tandem together in the pick and roll. But now he goes with Rich Paul, and Rich Paul is the track record of getting guys who are restricted free agents to hold down and eventually get a contract that is somewhat close to what they were looking for, and that didn't happen. He signed a QO that was even lower than it should have been for a number 6 draft pick because he didn't start enough games or play enough minutes this year. So this was kind of, I think this went as poorly as it could have for Nerlens, aside from the fact that he at least had something to sign and his team is at least taking it back. And it sucks for Dallas because they don't get to control the market on him next year, but the market is super favorable for Dallas at this point.
So yeah, let's kind of talk about all this, right? So in terms of what the market is going to look like, I think that there are probably like 5, 6, 7 teams total right now that are currently projected to have, something nearing max cap space next summer, right?
Yeah, that's right. I think it's 6.
And look at the market next summer. DeMarcus Cousins is a free agent. He's very clearly going to be the number 1 unrestricted center free agent in the NBA. Greg Monroe and Brook Lopez, both, offensive centers, but guys that are valuable, at least in most settings, to be sure. Joel Embiid, Yusuf Nurkic, Clint Capella, all unrestricted free agents, all restricted free agents next summer. So they're all going to. And I would
rather have all 3 of those guys than Nerlens at this point.
Yes, very clearly. I think I would rather have all 3 of those guys than Nerlens at this point. Also, Derek Favors, I believe, has an option that he can decline to enter the free agency market, which we'll see if that ends up being a realistic scenario for him. I'm not entirely sold on that, just given the fact that he has a massive injury history and we're not entirely sure what to expect there. But there is already, and we talked about Dwayne Dedmon being able to potentially drop an option, next summer as well. I'm not sure that the money is going to be there, and DeAndre Jordan can be a free agent next summer as well, correct?
Yeah, and if he leaves the Clippers, then Nerlens is completely screwed at that point because everybody wants DeAndre. DeAndre's the kind of player that everybody wants Noel to become, although Noel's more versatile. But yeah, It's amazing. The more you dive into it.
By the way, another name, Nikola Jokic, can be a restricted free agent next summer if the Nuggets decide to decline the $1 million option on his deal so that he is a restricted free agent because you only have restricted free agency rights on second rounders for 3 years. So I would imagine Denver would decide to decline that $1 million and just get him under contract as soon as possible. So
yeah, they'll max the crap out of him.
There are so many centers on the market next year in an NBA where there's just not this many roster spots. Like it just does. It's unfathomable to me that this would be the way that it went. Like this is just not smart. And I don't know if he had 4 years, $70 million on the table. Who knows? There are just so many different conflicting reports out there on this. Both Zach Lowe and Chris Haynes have said, that offer was never on the table. Woj and Happy Walters and, other people say that it was on the table. I don't really know if it was or not. If he even had like 460 on the table or like 455 on the table, like it gets hard to put off he's going to hit unrestricted free agency next year, and that's great. But he's now put in a situation where, like you said, he has to get such a massive contract to make up for the lack of earnings that he's getting this year as a young player that is going to hit, unrestricted free agency again if he would have signed a long-term deal this year at 27 years old next time around. So he would still be in place to be able to get another big contract later on in his career. So this $4 million year actually really does hinder his long-term outlook in terms of being able to get money, or at least get the most money that he could at some point. So none of this makes sense to me. I am not a fan of the way this was handled at all.
And our buddy Tim Cato at SB Nation had Mark Cuban on the record saying that it's hard to say that they never got there regarding whether that offer would have still been on the table that reported 470, which seems to at least indicate that it was there. And more importantly, was he also reported, Cato did, that a source close to the team told him that Nerlens' teammates thought that he should have taken the $17 million and that they felt that was a good number for him. And so even his own teammates are saying that he's certainly made a mistake, although made a mistake is hard to say, that they felt that was the right value for him. But it's the end game here for Nerlens is he thinks he's going to have a 2010 season this year, and he's going to be a max player, which, I don't blame the guy for betting on himself. I mean, if he doesn't get hurt, I think he's going to increase his value. I think he's going to have a really good year, especially with DSJ. If DSJ really is going to run out the gate the way he did so far in the Summer League, and we'll see what happens. But he certainly seems like he'll be pretty good off the bat. I mean, this could be a really good year for Nerlens. So I like the fact that he's betting on himself. It just seems that the market doesn't indicate that there's a chance for him to really up his value a significant degree, or at least enough to make up for the reduced earnings that he's going to have this year.
Yeah.
And to make up for the one later year entry into the next contract as well.
Yeah. He's just a weird player to evaluate in general. Like you mentioned at the top, he's only played 58% of his possible games so far in his career due to injury. So the injuries are a very realistic issue here. For a player that, has now dealt with multiple knee injuries over the course of his NBA career, dealt with them at Kentucky as well. This doesn't make, I understand betting on yourself, but at a certain point too, you really do just have to take what's on the table, I think. I'm rooting for Nerlens. I think that he's a fascinating player due to the defensive upside that he has. I also just worry that this is a mistake, and I hope that it doesn't come back to bite him in a significant way. The last thing I want to talk about here, just a quick thing. Solomon Hill is now out for 6 to 8 months, potentially. He has a torn hamstring. Chris Middleton had a similar injury this year. I believe he was out for right around 5 months. So I'm not entirely sure. Go ahead.
Miraculously, by the way, that he came back months earlier than anyone projected, and they said it was a miracle. So, yeah, we're counting on a miracle here for Solomon Hill to be ready this year. Even your dog doesn't think it's going to happen.
My dog is not a fan of Solomon Hill right now. I don't know what's going on. Jared, can you talk real quick talk about Solomon Hill real quick while I get the dog to shut up.
I'm going to talk about Solomon Hill while we take out the dog. This is painful from a lot of respects for New Orleans. I mean, before even getting to the Anthony Davis angle here, Hill is making 12.25 essentially this year, and then he still has 2 more years, increasing slightly over that. So to lose, I mean, they just signed him to a big 4-year, was it about $48 million or so deal last offseason. He starts for them, and I assume he's still going to start this year. And the backups that they have behind him, that the guy that's going to fill his spot right now is Quincy Pondexter, who's good, but has been incredibly injured his entire career as well.
He hasn't played in 2 years.
Exactly. He hasn't played at all, but I really liked him before he got hurt. He reminded me of like a better version of Ronnie Brewer, who I always was confused why he fell out of the league so quickly, because I always thought he looked pretty good.
I mean, Quincy Pondexter was like sneakily turning into the guy that New Orleans kind of hoped that Solomon Hill could be. Solomon Hill's a little bit better defensively, but similarly, they were kind of combo 3-4s in today's NBA, and Pondexter could actually kind of shoot. You know what I mean? Like, that's what New Orleans needs. They need a guy who could, defend multiple positions and shoot. That really hasn't happened with Hill outside of that one playoff game or one playoff series with Indiana that, I think wasn't really representative.
And that's why he got paid. And it was, I mean, New Orleans was desperately looking for glue guys, and they got one. And, I thought Hill maybe was a little bit overpaid, but overall, I thought he was very good defensively last year. And he fits into multiple spots for them, which is great. But they don't have him now.
But the other thing here I want to bring up is that I'm sorry for interrupting you. I don't know how great of a fit he is with both DeMarcus Cousins and Anthony Davis on that team. Because I've always thought of him as a little bit better as, a small ball 4 that can kind of stretch the floor a little bit, but then just be super versatile defensively. That fits a lot better with one of those two guys than both of those two guys, I think.
Absolutely agree. I would say the only caveat to that is that Cousins and Davis can play almost anywhere on the floor, so at least that kind of helps. But you're right. The point.
Yeah, you're right. You're right.
Yeah. Well, I'd say more offensively than defensively. I am not a fan of DeMarcus Cousins' defense, and I think Anthony's is maybe a little bit overrated, although he's getting there. But whatever. The point is, this screws him over bad because Etuan Moore he's just a guard, even though he's very versatile, although I like him a lot. Pondexter hopefully will be healthy. They brought back Darius Miller, who was a second-round pick a few years ago and has been lighting it up over in Europe, so
Germany.
We'll see. Yeah. So they don't have anyone else on the roster right now that could possibly fit into this role. So they have to go on the free agency market, and they are right now, assuming they keep Jordan Crawford, they are less than $1 million short of the luxury tax threshold. So I believe if they sign a veteran minimum player, they're going to cross that tax threshold, right? Which means they would be paying luxury tax for a team that maybe has a chance of fighting for the playoffs.
I don't know if it's $1 million, but I think that it's like within $2 or $3 million. I think it's pretty close.
Yeah, looking at Basketball Insiders, they have the inclusive total with Crawford at 118.4, and then the tax threshold at 119.3-ish. So they're getting dangerously close to the luxury tax here for a team that they have to fight for the playoffs, because this is where the Anthony Davis angle comes in, or even the DeMarcus Cousins angle. But I've been talking about Anthony Davis being the target for the Celtics for I think almost a year now, and I've gone from the crazy guy yelling wolf in the Village Square to nobody recognizing it because Woj talked about it. Now everyone's talking about it. But the point being is that it's a real thing. Before they made this trade where they included the Brooklyn Nets pick, they certainly had the assets to pull it off. Now I assume they'd have to include Jason Tatum and or Jaylen Brown and or Marcus Smart to be able to actually give New Orleans enough to somehow pry him away if he were to somehow request a trade, which would have to be a Kyrie Irving type trade request for this to actually go down.
So here's kind of my thought on this whole thing.
Go for it.
They need Memphis to be really bad, like the Celtics do. I mean, they need that pick to look really, really good into the future.
Good, yeah.
They would need Jalen and Jason to be as good as I think they can be. And then they would need New Orleans to just go crazy, because I honestly don't think there's any reason why they should be looking to trade Anthony Davis right now. I would still be waiting 2 years to do it from now. If they're in the middle of not this coming season, but in the middle of next season, after this one that's upcoming, and like the 2018-19 season, and things are still fucked, then maybe I look at it. But we're still a ways away, I think, from Anthony Davis. But I also don't know that it's unfair to talk about it either, just given that this organization has been such an incredible shit show now for the entirety of his tenure there.
Well, I would just say, I mean, there's never a situation where you would ever want to trade Anthony Davis. It's only, will the situation get bad enough that he would request a trade? And, the X factor here is that he's playing next to DeMarcus Cousins now. And if that time bomb goes off while Anthony Davis is in the room and he gets hit by the blast, he might decide, okay, well, I'm getting out of here before I actually get taken down. So, I mean, no matter, we just saw it happen with Paul George. It's not the equivalent situation, but we saw with Kevin Durant where these guys, they'll stick it out for a long time, but at a certain point it comes to an end. Now Davis still has 3 years guaranteed left on his contract, including this year. So it wouldn't be until next year where it's entering that final year, and it's the same situation that we just have with Paul George. But if this year is a total shit show, and the track record has been that it is, and the Solomon Hill injury is a massive blow that tips them towards that situation, and they're once again in the low to mid 30s in wins, then that might be what it takes for him to go, I don't want to do this, but I have to do this because my career is not going to go anywhere here, and I'm a historically great player, and I need to start competing for titles, and I can't even sniff the playoffs.
Yeah, the Pelicans, they're in some trouble. You kind of mentioned their wing depth earlier. I just kind of actually want to run through every player on their roster who is physically capable of playing the wing right now.
Oh, this is going to be sad. Go ahead.
Quincy Pondexter, who has literally not played an NBA game in 2 years. Like you said, I think, like we both said, we both do like him. But there are just too many variables there to where I think he can be counted on. Etuan Moore is 6'4", but he's a 2. Like, he'll at least play the 2. Darius Miller is 6'8", a small forward that they're now going to be counting on pretty significantly. Jalen Jones and Charles Cook are both like kind of 6'5" to 6'6" guys who can kind of play the wing. Charles Cook's certainly a wing. He's 6'5" with a 7-foot wingspan. Shooter, can do some stuff athletically. Always been a good defender at Dayton, but he still went undrafted. You'd be counting on an undrafted player to be able to play wing. Jones is more of a 3-4 kind of guy. Like we said, Solomon Hill out with injury now.
And also Clark, one of those guys isn't going to make the roster, right?
Both Jalen Jones, both Jalen Jones and Charles Cook are two ways. So
okay.
That at least makes it easier. But Ian Clark, they signed. I think that's an interesting signing, to say the least. They're also going to play Drew Holiday at the 2, which I've talked about before on this podcast. I'm not a fan of the move. The Rajon Rondo Rajon Rondo signing, allowed them to be able to move him off the ball. They're going to need him to play a lot of 2 now. They're going to be taking Drew Holiday out of what, in my opinion, is his best spot, point guard, to play him at the 2 because they kind of have to play him at the 2 now. And they're going to have to play a lot of small perimeters, I think, unless Darius Miller and Quincy Pondexter are a lot better than what I think can be anticipated right now. Like, you're going to have to see, I think, a lot of lineups of Rondo, Holiday, Ian Clark, Rondo, Holiday, Etuan Moore, Holiday, Etuan Moore, and if Jordan Crawford ends up staying on this roster. Tony Allen would be an interesting signing for them, I think. I would be trying to scrounge up as much money as possible, but that becomes difficult when you're paying Omer Ashik and Alexis Ajinça $15 million next year.
See, that's a big question. So, like, for instance, Boston is apparently filling up their roster with guys not named Tony Allen, and he seemed kind of like the perfect fit to come into Boston after they got rid of Avery Bradley, and they could use a guy exactly like him. And New Orleans seems to be the team that absolutely should be signing Tony Allen, but he's still available somehow. And even though he is, I think, 36 now, I didn't see anything last year that told me that he shouldn't be on an NBA team. He's sure as hell still is one of the best defenders in the league. So
yep.
I am completely in the dark as to why Tony Allen is not on a team right now.
Yeah, it's very weird. Jared, do you have anything else that you want to say? Anything else that you want to talk about before I let you go?
Sam, you're a tremendous guy. It's been fun.
Jared, it's been fun. We're going to do this again very soon, I am sure. Tell the people where they can find your work. Tell the people where they can find you on social media.
You can find me on Twitter, Jared Weiss NBA. You can find me on Instagram as well if you want to see my beautiful mug. You can find me over at CelticsBlog, which is SB Nation's Celtics website, and CLNS Media Network, where you're hearing this show as well. And I host the Garden Report video post-game show after all the Celtics games. So looking forward to getting that going pretty soon. Preseason's around the corner. However, I will actually be in Europe during preseason, so won't see me until opening night, I guess.
Yeah, I'm doing Mexico the last week of September, so I'm
nice.
very excited to just get away from basketball for a week and go to Playa del Carmen, sit on a beach, read, and just hang out.
Yeah, see, I'm doing the Amalfi Coast, and I think while I'm there, the Celtics have like 2 games, and I'm gonna have to watch them and write on them. So I guess if I'm gonna have to cover preseason basketball, doing it from the Amalfi Coast, yeah, pretty decent way to do it.
That is a pretty good spot. Jared, we will talk to you soon on this pod. Listeners, if you wait just about 10 seconds from now, you will hear me and my good friend Reags from over at Barstool talking some college basketball. All right, we're here now with good friend of the program, Reags from over at Barstool. Buddy, it's been a long time since you've been on the podcast. How are you doing?
I know it has.
I've been on your podcast, I feel like, at least once, maybe twice since you've been on this podcast, and I had to give the listeners what they want because you continue to be one of the most requested people.
Yeah, we had that home and home a couple weeks ago where you guest hosted, and then I came on a couple days later.
Yeah, it was. That's what we need to do more often. We need to do the home and homes.
I know.
Let's talk about a couple things that have happened recently in college basketball. This is just basically a news and notes podcast around the basketball world. But the big thing that is happening in basketball right now is this Mitchell Robinson situation where he de-enrolled from Western Kentucky earlier, I believe in July, maybe like the first week of August, and was visiting other schools. He visited LSU, visited New Orleans. I know he was connected with Kansas, and I believe he visited there. There have been a lot of speculation on what he was going to do. He could have decided to go pro. He could have decided to just take some time and prepare for the NBA draft. He's now decided to just go back to Western Kentucky. This is just the weirdest story I can remember in recruiting, really. What are your thoughts on this Mitchell Robinson situation?
It reminds me of the Michael Scott episode of The Office with the dinner party where he's yelling about his vasectomy. He's just going, snip, snap, back and forth, back and forth. That's what this is.
Does that make Shamond Williams...
Jan.
Yeah, Jan, where she's like singing the song about her assistant fucking her?
Yes. And then... like New Orleans, LSU, and Kansas were Jim, Andy, and Pam.
Just like all like looking on in just horror. Before we go there, how do you feel about the dinner party episode? Because I feel like it is the most like contentious episode of The Office.
It's okay. Like, it's not the most cringeworthy because Scott's Tots is.
Oh man, that one's really bad. Dinner Party is close, but it's not that bad.
The thing with Dinner Party is like it has the memorable flat screen line.
Yeah, that's true. And like the fucking like 6-inch flat screen.
Yeah, so like it like that kind of like holds its weight, but it's a weird episode. Like it's not my favorite. It's one where it's like, all right, I guess I have to watch this because I'm just in a rhythm where I forget to hit like go to the next episode on Netflix.
Yeah.
But for Mitchell Robinson, yeah, it's absolutely, this is by far the weirdest like recruiting situation ever. And you know, it makes sense why he went to Western Kentucky to begin with, because he was committed to A&M when Stansbury was there, just followed Stansbury and had the Shammond Williams story.
Yeah, so Shammond Williams is his godfather, if I remember correctly.
Yeah,
right?
his godfather / mentor. So, you know, when you kind of look at it, it's like, okay, I understand it, but I've been preaching this for the last couple of years, really since like the Malik Newman, Steven Zimmerman year, their freshman year, of just, if you're a top, 25 guy, top 20 guy, there are really only about 15 schools, 20 schools you should go to.
You should not think outside of the box.
No, like go to Kentucky, Kansas, Arizona, Duke, Carolina, Villanova, like, UCLA, the ones that everyone goes to. Like, and I know everyone like kind of bitches about it, being like, well, you just don't like parity. And it's like, no, like I think
that we would prefer that these kids go to the other schools and make them good. But we're kind of thinking about it from their perspective more than anything. Like, we want them to be the most successful versions of themselves they can be. And these high-end programs have now proven the ability to get these elite level prospects through their system without their draft stock being hindered in most cases. I think that there are a few exceptions that you can say there, but at the same time, I agree with you. I think that if I was I don't even know if I'd go as low as top 25. I would say if I was a top 10 kid, a top 15 kid, I think that you should not really be thinking outside of the box.
Yeah. And the way I say it is because, if you're that high of a recruit, the end goal is obviously the NBA, most likely one and done or two and done.
Yeah.
It's like picking a major anywhere else. Like if you want to be a journalist, if you're a great journalist, you're going to look at certain schools. You're not going to go to Mississippi Valley State instead of, Northwestern.
Kids, do not major in journalism. Do not do it.
Don't. I majored in journalism. Don't do it. Well, actually, do it if you want to have like a lot of easy classes, but don't do it
if you care about your life.
College. Yeah, if you want like 4 years of just no real seriousness, yeah, it's awesome. But it's just one of those like. I understand. It's just a disaster. Like I don't know how to describe the Mitchell Robinson situation besides it's a disaster.
Yeah, I feel really bad for him.
Yeah, because he ends up being the one that not everyone, but like the casual fan is kind of turning against. Like, well, why this player just can't stay committed? And, the biggest bullshit is that people get mad. Well, he committed to Western Kentucky. It's like, no, he committed to Stansbury / Shammond Williams. The moment Shammond Williams got let go, left, whatever it was, that's in a whole nother situation. The moment he left, it should be free to transfer wherever you want. And I believe that for any player, any incoming freshman, if they commit to a school and a coach leaves, they should be allowed to transfer wherever, free of waiver.
Yeah, so that's a point you've brought up, and I think it's a little bit more situational than that. Like, I think that if any head coach leaves, you should be able to get out of your letter of intent and go elsewhere and play immediately. I also believe that if an assistant gets fired or an assistant goes elsewhere who you very clearly can prove had a relationship with before the recruiting process, so in this case, Shammond Williams, his godfather, I think that you should be able to transfer and do whatever you want. The Mitchell Robinson thing is really interesting just because Western Kentucky, Stansbury has his reputation, which I don't really want to get into because, it's just a can of worms that I don't really want to open. He now, I believe, got rid of all 3 assistants from the end of last season to the beginning of this season. It's
and
not
all
just
at weird
Shammond
times,
Williams.
too.
Yeah, I believe that all 3 are gone. So, I agree with you. Like, I think in this case, Mitchell Robinson should have been able to transfer free of penalty wherever he wanted to go. Now, I'm also a little bit skeptical on how this whole thing is going to go down because if I remember correctly, Mitchell Robinson was in the middle of like a summer class, wasn't he? Whenever,
because that's why he couldn't. That's why he needed the waivers, because he was enrolled already in a class, as opposed to, who the hell was it? Who wasn't? Somebody was able to train, like Ben Bruss, the guy I do my podcast with. He was able to, even though he was like enrolled or something like that. There was some situation where he because he didn't take a summer class, he was eligible right away.
Yeah. So for people who don't remember, Ben committed to Iowa immediately, and then ended up moving on to Wisconsin after what was it? Licklider? Was it Todd Licklider?
Licklider left.
Licklider left. And when the coach left, he was obviously able to get out.
Yeah. So that's the thing. It's one of those. And who's the kid down at NC State that's going through the same type of thing? That transferred from Ohio State.
Yeah, it's fuck.
I can't think of his name off the top of my head, but same thing. He took a summer class, and now. And what's a shame is it's
Braxton Beverly.
Yes. And what's a shame is this stupid ass rule. One of the many stupid ass rules the NCAA has. It's going to deter freshmen from taking summer classes.
Yeah. If I would, it's so complicated. Like if I had any doubts about my school, which, Mitchell Robinson, I think probably should have had, given the fact that it was just Western Kentucky, and this isn't a traditional one and done powerhouse. I think that he probably should have kept his options open just in case, but at the same time, it's a very convoluted situation. Like there's so many different factors.
It's guys like that. I remember Brandon Knight specifically doing it, never signing a letter of intent.
Yep.
Because you're not going to get recruited over like when you're a top 10, top 15 guy. If you're a 3-star, it's kind of tougher to say go ahead and don't sign it. If you're one of the 5-star guys, I wouldn't sign it. You get to leave all your options open. And now I wouldn't take any summer classes. Like I would show up the first day of fall semester. Hey, I'm here. I'm ready to do what I have to do. But my options were open until that moment.
Yeah, no, I agree. Like I don't really know what the benefit is unless he needed to take the summer class to like get eligible, I guess. That would seem reasonable maybe. But now he's also, the other thing is he's also like entering classes a week after Western Kentucky school started. And there's obviously some late registration stuff. Like it's not impossible to get this thing done, but I would imagine the NCAA is going to be looking pretty damn heavily at the way this goes down. Right. It's a bad look because of, it's such a big name to go along with the weird situation. Like, I'm sure this has happened numerous times at smaller levels. Never do you see something like, a top 10 guy going through something like this. So it's just, that's where I think you're going to see not a whole can of worms open up, but I think you'll see some of these big time guys start being a little bit more careful with like summer classes and things along those natures, which again, which will cause the traditionalists to yell about how, you're on scholarship, you should do whatever you have to do, and all that noise. That's just false information. Yeah. And given all of this that we've kind of talked about with how he was going to be ineligible, I actually think he's making the right call. Now, if he can get eligible at Western Kentucky again, like he was not going to be able to play this year for Kansas or New Orleans or LSU in all likelihood, barring some sort of special waiver that I cannot see him getting. So I think he's actually making the right call going back to Western Kentucky because his draft stock is not as safe a place as I think a lot of people believed. Like, he's still a very, very raw player right now. Yeah. Like, he's athletic, he's long, can shoot a little bit. I think that's worth saying. Like, he has like a decent 15-footer, but still is figuring out how to play basketball, really. And there was a scenario this year where if he kind of didn't take the responsibility of training for the NBA draft seriously, he could have really tanked his draft stock, not being around a more structured atmosphere. And I hope that being at Western Kentucky, he will be within a more structured atmosphere and be able to really take things seriously and, continue to get on the path of development toward being a first-round pick. But I think the other road was very fraught with potential downsides, whereas this one, as long as he can play, I mean, he's going to fucking destroy the CUSA. Like, it's actually a league this year that's pretty good. I tweeted that out earlier. I know our good friend of the program, Seth Greenberg, tweeted out how he thought that the CUSA was pretty strong. Giddy Potts, John Elmore at Marshall, a few other guys he mentioned as NBA draft prospects. I followed up with Chris Coakley and William Lee at UAB and Jacoby Boykins at Louisiana Tech. There are actually quite a few NBA potential guys who will probably get summer league deals at the very least within that league. He's still just so much more athletic than anyone he will go up against in that league. Like he is going to wreck it.
It's one of those where when looking at like the situation or where he could have went, when he first left Western Kentucky, everyone's asking, I got a lot of questions. What's the best thing for him to do? And I honestly had no idea because there's red flags with everything. Yeah. It's like, well, if he goes to Western Kentucky, let's say he's like a down year, let's just say he struggles for whatever reasons, off the court stuff going on, whatever. He couldn't compete at Western Kentucky, and now he's going to go to the NBA. Yep. Whereas, okay, let's say he took the year off. It's like, well, he is still a little bit of a mystery. I mean, we've seen NBA teams, kind of take a risky pick. That could be him. If he goes overseas, I kind of want to see him just go to the G League, honestly. I was really hoping for that.
Yeah, I mean, I did not really see that as a potential outcome.
No, I just wanted it to happen.
Yeah, I mean, the other good thing here is that if he gets eligible at Western Kentucky, he will be around a couple of proven guards, too. Yeah. That's worth mentioning. Like Lamonte Bearden is there. He sat out last year after being at Buffalo for a couple years, playing in the NCAA tournament. Darius Thompson, the former Virginia guard, is there. There actually is like a decent chance that, he's not going to be by himself trying to do this stuff. They actually have talent. They can really get him going, I think.
Yeah, he'll be able to put up.
They have the Hollingsworth kid, too. Good freshman.
Yeah. He'll be able to put up good numbers, but I don't think you'll see, he's not going to put like Michael Beasley numbers or anything ridiculous like that. He'll be a guy that I think will be consistent because he doesn't, teams won't be able to throw four guys in the paint against him.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. Let's move on. Let's stop talking about Mitchell Robinson. Start talking about you, Robert Regan, Esquire.
Yeah.
Breaking goddamn news earlier today. Donna DeToda over at Syracuse.com tweeted out that Taurean Thompson was unlikely to enroll or unlikely to be back at Syracuse. You followed up by saying, and I'm going to let you kind of break this down.
Yeah, so I probably should have tweeted this from the podcast Twitter account in case it goes sour. I could just blame it on Ben.
Yeah, that would have been great.
But that's what I should have done. But so what I heard and from multiple sources, not just one, I kind of got it from 2 to 3, was Taurean Thompson was on campus at Seton Hall. His mother was on campus as well with him at Seton Hall. And the plan is for him to announce that he is transferring to Seton Hall within the next week. I believe he has until the 5th to announce it. And then it followed up with, I don't know who had this one first. I saw a lot of people talking about it. Their one recruit, now his name slipping my mind, is going to Montverde Academy, so it opens up the scholarship for this year. I had heard that he's going to try to be eligible this year because he hadn't signed. He wasn't on an athletic scholarship at Syracuse or something along those lines, and they're applying like a family hardship waiver.
Yep.
Or possibly will do that. Which if that ends up happening, boy, that Seton Hall team's scary good.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. Let me talk real quick about what Taurean Thompson is. So Taurean Thompson, 6'9", 6'10", athletic, power forward / center kind of guy. Played at Brewster Academy, very well-known school, has had NBA players in the past. Thompson, shot 55% from the field, averaged right around, I believe, 20 points and 9 rebounds per 40 minutes, if I remember from looking at his numbers earlier. Athletic guy, can get up and block some shots, can really move his feet pretty well. Has the semblance of a jump shot, I would say, more than is actually a good shooter at this stage.
It's there. It has the potential to be there.
Yeah, it's a weapon that he can continue to develop, and if he was shooting threes within the next 2 years consistently at a good rate, I would not be shocked at all. Still needs to kind of get there, though. I've now officially pulled up his sports reference page. As a freshman, 22.3 PER, 57% true shooting percentage. The 20-9 that I said earlier, it looks like, was right. Overall, just a really good project to take on. Like, he's a project that could realistically help now a Seton Hall team or wherever he would end up. I'm sure that Reags reporting is right. The Seton Hall seems like the move here for Taurean Thompson. But at the same time, this is a guy that, in my opinion at least, I would say the odds are against him being an NBA player, but I think that there's also a chance that he could develop into an NBA player down the road. And there aren't many guys on the market at this stage of the process that you can say that about. A very realistic athlete who can potentially step back and shoot threes and block shots is what every team in the country, both college and NBA, is looking for.
And if it does hold true that he's going to Seton Hall, he has the ability to play with some nice players there. Not only this year, where they obviously have that loaded senior, the 3-headed monster senior class, but like Madison Jones and Ish Sanogo's only a sophomore this year or junior this year.
I think he'll be a junior this year. Yeah.
Junior this year. So if he misses, let's say he has to sit out this year, he's practicing with all those guys and he gets a year with Jones and Sanogo. That's a pretty, in the Big East, which is a good conference. I think people often forget how good that conference is. He has the talent around him to help him, kind of achieve that too. Like, he's not going to a smaller school where he has to be the guy, or he's going to get lost or something like that. I really like the Seton Hall fit for him. I think he ends up possibly being a second round pick, but I'm not I wouldn't bet on it.
Right.
I don't know if he works his way into a first round pick, but again, if he ends up shooting the ball well, or continues to show this growth with his jumper, I wouldn't see why a team wouldn't take a second round pick on him.
Yeah, I just want to follow up real quick here. Sanogo is a senior this year, actually. I thought he was.
Or Sanogo's a senior. Who am I thinking of? Who's the other big guy that they have?
Michael Enze.
Yeah.
But also, Madison Jones is not the guy that they still have. They still have Miles Powell.
Miles Powell. Madison Jones is the transfer from Wake.
Yeah, they brought in both those guys, and one of them transferred, one of them stayed. Miles Powell is the one that stayed. But also, Aaron Gordon is there now, too. So,
that's right. I completely forgot about that.
Yeah, no, that's a really interesting one for me as well. If this ends up extending into next season, potentially. I could see him becoming a decent player by next season. I don't know if he's going to be there this year yet, but I think he has a shot.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I'll tell you what, Kevin Willard, a guy who a couple years ago looked like he was on the verge of being fired, and was on the, quote, hot seat, he's really turned around the perception of himself coaching at Seton Hall these last couple of years.
Yep. And then I also want to bring up to Quincy McKnight. They got him from Sacred Heart. He's a transfer, I believe, that'll have to sit out this season. Averaged 19 points a game at Sacred Heart, too.
Even if Thompson's out this year, you're practicing, that group practicing together for next year, Seton Hall's going to be a top 4 team in the Big East again.
Yeah, no, I think that they would have a shot to be a top 4 team in the Big East next year. Not this year. I think they're the second best team in the Big East going.
Oh, for sure.
Next year, I think it's still pretty up in the air, to be honest. We'll see. They would still need to get a couple more guys in, just because, like you mentioned, the Big East is a really strong league. I think, and it doesn't get enough credit for being that. But this is an interesting move if they do end up getting Taurean Thompson. I would be a fan of this for Kevin Willard, and for Syracuse, this is an issue.
That's what I wanted to ask you about. What's your take on Syracuse with this?
I mean, here's the thing: like, they really needed him. Who
They're
did
not
they
gonna
have
be
coming
good.
back in the front court? Like Pascal Chukwu, I believe, is going to be healthy, right?
Yeah, I mean, they're just not going to be good. They weren't good last year, and look who they lose.
Yeah, I mean, they lose Tyler Lydon, they lose John Gillen, and they lose Andrew White too. Yeah, like it's a big deal. Like they really do. They needed Taurean Thompson to take that next leap and be the player that they thought he could be.
He needs to be number 2. Like, he needs to be like a second guy to Tyus Battle up there.
Yeah, like, and I think I'm as high on Tyus Battle as nearly anyone in the country. For spoilers, for people who are buying the Athlon magazine, I did the top 100 ranking there. I think I had Tyus Battle as like a top 40 player in the country. Like, I'm a huge fan of him, but what does he have around him now? Like, he has Chukwu, maybe.
Frank Howard.
Interesting. Frank Howard. They do have Matthew Moyer, the kid from Ohio who redshirted last year. I
can't believe DeJuan Coleman's not there still. He was in college for 19 years.
I mean, would anyone be opposed to just letting him play?
He'd still only play about 7 minutes a game.
I don't know that he would. I feel like he'd have to play more.
Yeah, but I'll tell you what, this is a weird time for Syracuse because they're you know what? They're honestly a bullshit Final Four run from having a pretty terrible 4-year stretch here. Like, they had a really good 2012, 13. They lost to Dayton when Dayton got hot. But they kind of struggled. They won like 18 games a year after that, and then they had the run to the Final Four, which I hate judging your season solely on the NCAA tournament. Last year didn't make the tournament. This year they probably won't make the tournament. I mean, for Syracuse, that's a rough stretch.
Yeah, so like that Final Four run, I agree with you. I honestly don't think they should have made the tournament.
I was firmly on them being out that year.
Yeah, I agree. Like, I did not think they should have been in that year. And, kudos to Jim Boeheim and that coaching staff and those players for going on that run.
And you can't help who you play in the tournament, which is why it's fluky and a terrible way to judge the season. But they beat a 7, a 15, and 11 seed. And then now Syracuse won the game, but Virginia also had one of the biggest collapses ever. In the second half.
I'll give them that for taking it to Virginia.
Virginia collapsed because of Syracuse.
Yep.
But, I mean, 3 wins, again, you can't help you play, which is why I hate when people are like, well, they made the Final Four. That season was a success. I said, no, that's actually, it was an underwhelming season. You got hot for 4 games.
So, yeah, like in the last 3 years in the ACC, they've gone 9-9, 9-9, 10-8.
With an unbalanced schedule, which again is a little, you get the wins, but it's it's kind of an asterisk with it.
But the other thing here is I don't see a way that they go 500 in the ACC this year.
No.
So say they go 7-11, which I think is conservative.
I'd say reasonable, yeah.
Yeah, I think they could be worse than that. I mean,
for sure.
I would say their ceiling is probably 9-9, but I think 7-11 is a pretty conservative outcome in terms of how good they can be.
Because who are teams you think they are comparable to in the ACC?
I'll say this right now. I think Boston College might be better.
Yeah. I mean, Georgia Tech, better. Wake Forest, probably better.
I would say Wake is better. With Bryant Crawford and
I would say I trust Crawford, Childress,
Sean D. Brown. They bring back,
and they bring back what's his face, Woods, the other. I trust that group more than I trust Syracuse.
Yeah.
Who's Syracuse better than the ACC? Clemson.
Clemson does bring back what's his name, Dante Grantham, And, they're going to get Elijah Thomas for a full year, and they'll have Marquise Reed, I believe. I'm not 100% sure they're better than Clemson.
So they're comparable to Clemson.
I would probably take Clemson over them for what it's worth, which is crazy.
Who are they better than?
Probably better than Pitt, I would say.
Pitt, NC State?
I would...
Probably better than NC State?
Yeah. Yeah, this is going to be a rebuilding year for NC State. But they're on that plane, I think, without thinking too hard about it, I mean, seriously, this Syracuse roster...
That's the third or fourth worst ACC team.
I think that this is like a 6-12 ACC team.
Yeah.
And if that's the case, you're looking at a scenario where there'll be 4 games under 500 in the ACC over the last 4 years under Jim Boeheim. It's not great, I would say. It's not great. But I also think that it speaks to the question of what kind of job is this? Jim Boeheim is going to leave eventually. I know that he just signed this 3-year extension, but at some point, Jim Boeheim is no longer going to be the coach of Syracuse, and they're going to have to go out and find someone. And I know,
assuming Mike Hopkins doesn't come back.
Maybe that could happen, but
that's what I think a lot of people are banking on.
But also, okay, let's say Hopkins doesn't come back, because if I was him, I would probably rather be in Washington.
I'd rather be at Washington.
I think that's a better job. There's a better talent base in the Pacific Northwest in Seattle.
And you probably have a little bit of a longer leash there.
Yeah, I think that it's going to be easier to get kids to come in the rain than come in the snow in Washington versus Syracuse. I know it snows in Washington, obviously, but perceptions matter to these kids.
Yeah, well, it's Seattle versus Syracuse.
Right. So I think there's a significant question here as to what kind of job Syracuse is going forward.
Yeah, because we don't know Syracuse basketball, what it is without Boeheim.
Yeah, I don't know what to expect.
We don't know, can you win there, or is it just Boeheim has been a really good coach and just successful there because he's also been there for 400 years.
Yeah, and I think that you can probably get kids. I think that
because it's still a name.
Yeah, I think you can probably make it work.
Yeah.
They also get O'Shea Brissett this year, who I like. They also get they have a Slovakian kid or something.
It's
that they
to me, Syracuse and UConn are kind of in the same boat. With Syracuse, I think a little bit better than UConn just because you're in the ACC versus the AAC. Where when Ollie and Boeheim leave, I just don't know what kind of coaches they're going to get.
And you know what? I'll also mention this too. So, Jim Boeheim has been out on the recruiting trail more than any other coach in the 2018 class because he's able to be out on the recruiting trail because of Buddy. He can go to events that other coaches can't under the guise of seeing his son play basketball.
And just sit there and and be a face of the crowd.
Right, and they now have Darius Bazley coming in, who's a top 40 kid. I know that some places have him as a top 20 kid in the class. They have a good recruit coming in. They have, Buddy, I think will be there, and I'm a pretty big fan of his going forward. I would also imagine that just generally he's going to be able to pick out kids in that class better than most coaches are because he's seen them more than these other coaches have, and he's been out on the recruiting trail more than he has in previous years. I think there is probably an argument that he's going to find better kids in this 2018 class than what would typically be expected. I think that these kids the kids that they recruit, I think would be better suited to outperforming their recruiting ranking than others. But I don't know, man. I agree with you. I don't know what this Syracuse job is. I think it's going to be really tricky to get the right coach there that can take advantage of the distinct advantages that Syracuse has, which is, in my opinion, the fan base is fucking incredible, and the Carrier Dome is one of the best home court advantages in the country.
Yeah. It's gonna be interesting, man. It's just another weird situation in college basketball.
Yeah, and to me, it's one of the weirdest, to be honest.
Yep.
Like for
sure.
That is one of the hardest spots to really figure out right now. But Taurean Thompson, likely to Seton Hall, is where we got started here. Reags, shout out to you for reporting that today. Shout out to you in general. Tell the people where they can find your work.
You can go to barstoolsports.com. Right now, I am doing Eurobasket stuff with that starting up this week, putting out group previews and rosters so you can kind of follow along because I'm a big fan of it.
What is the Barstool audience for Eurobasket?
People are confused, but then you see like the rosters and you're like, oh, wait a minute, I would watch this.
Yeah.
Because it's NBA players playing, like our boy Kristaps. And like college guys that you remember, like Anthony Randolph is playing for Slovenia.
Love it.
Luka Doncic.
Love it.
Yeah, so doing everything over there in Barstool. I do a weekly mailbag. I do, like I said, I'm doing Eurobasket right now. I've been doing roundups with it kind of being the off season, just trying to keep it condensed. So easy to follow along. So go to barstoolsports.com on Barstool U. You can follow me on Twitter at Barstool Reags. Podcast with former Wisconsin guard Ben Brust. Fundamentally Sound, which you can find on iTunes, Stitchers, all that good stuff, and our own Twitter, Fundamentally SD, where we have some cool stuff going on there. So, yeah, you can find me all over those places.
Go follow Reags. Go follow the random shit that Barstool puts out. I think it's fucking incredible. I enjoyed all of their coverage from the ridiculous Floyd Mayweather fight this weekend. I honestly enjoyed their coverage of it more than the actual fight, the little bit of it that I saw itself. Like, I cared way more about the way that they were covering it than the actual fight.
Both were shit shows, so it made sense.
Well, yeah, it was fucking hilarious. So go follow all that work over there. This has been the Game Theory Podcast. Please remember to rate, review, and subscribe to the show on iTunes. It really helps us move up in the ratings. We'll be back on Wednesday with more interesting content, I am sure. Going to try and get into something of a regular schedule here coming up. Weirdly, I've tried to schedule out some future podcasts going forward, which is very rare for this show. Normally, I'm just kind of scrambling at the end of the day like I did today to find guests. So hopefully a lot of really fun stuff. Keep it locked here. And until next time, we'll talk soon. Bye.